different things like that, like things you would never think of, crazy stuff. We said yes a lot to mostly everything and everywhere.
They weren't just bandmates, they were brothers. Jon Bon Jovi, the smiling frontman, and Richie Sambora, the fiery guitarist. For 30 years, they conquered the world together, writing the anthems that became the soundtrack for a generation. Their partnership seemed unbreakable, a force of nature defining stadium rock. Then, on April 2, 2013, after 3 decades of shared stages and platinum records, the music just stopped. Richie Sambora, the man many called the soul of the Bon Jovi sound, walked away from a world tour without a word. He vanished, leaving millions of fans with one agonizing question: why? For over a decade, the real story was buried under whispers of addiction and a carefully managed corporate narrative. Now, at 65, Richie Sambora is finally setting the record straight. He's revealing how his lifelong partner, Jon Bon Jovi, created a situation that pushed him out, and how one of rock's greatest partnerships was dismantled from the inside. This isn't the story you've been told. This is the story of what really happened. To understand the breakup, you first have to understand the bond. Before the private jets and sold-out stadiums, there was just a room. In that room, 2 guys from New Jersey with impossibly big hair and even bigger dreams found a chemistry that comes along once in a generation. Jon Bon Jovi was the charismatic frontman with a poster boy smile and a relentless drive. He had the vision, but he needed a spark. He needed a gunslinger. He found him in Richie Sambora, a guitar prodigy who'd already toured with Joe Cocker. Richie had a soulful, bluesy grit that could turn pop rock into something epic. From the moment they teamed up in 1983, it was electric. It was Jon's knack for anthems fused with Richie's raw melodic power. As Sambora later said, they were like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Jon was the strategist, the face of the operation. Richie was the soulful artist who gave the band its musical credibility and a dangerous edge. Their songwriting process was legendary. They'd lock themselves away and emerge with classics. You Give Love a Bad Name, Want It Dead or Alive, Livin' on a Prayer. These were more than songs. They were cultural events choreographed by the duo. In fact, Livin' on a Prayer was a track Jon nearly tossed, but Richie fought for it, adding his iconic talkbox riff that transformed it into one of the greatest rock anthems of all time. It was their dynamic in a nutshell. Jon built the house. Richie turned it into a home. On stage, their brotherhood was undeniable. The shared mics, the knowing glances, the harmonized vocals that were so crucial to their sound. Jon himself admitted, the true magic of their live show was when their voices came together. For years, they were a family, an unbreakable unit that took on the world and won. But behind the smiles, the foundation of this musical empire was slowly starting to crack, and the architect of the band was quietly drawing up new blueprints that didn't necessarily have room for his co-pilot. Fame is a strange thing. It can bind people together, but more often, it isolates them. As the 80s bled into the 90s, the power dynamic in Bon Jovi began to shift. The band that was once a democratic gang of 5 slowly started to feel more like the Jon Bon Jovi Show. It wasn't a sudden coup, just a gradual change. The name on the marquee was becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. As the years rolled on, Jon became the central figure, the CEO of the Bon Jovi enterprise. The rest of the band, including the man who was once his creative equal, started to feel more like employees. Richie Sambora, a formidable songwriter himself, felt the change deeply. He admitted that, as Jon's star rose, his own role felt diminished. The public, he felt, was being led to believe that Jon wrote and sang everything. When asked about this, Sambora's response was chillingly direct. He said his role became, to shut the F up. That was part of my deal, he explained. And, you know what? Guess what? I did it. And it worked out because that's what he needed, for whatever reason. This wasn't just about ego. It was about the creative soul of the band. The collaborative magic was being replaced by a more corporate process, managed by Jon, a key figure. In this new dynamic was producer and guitarist John Shanks, who began co-writing with Jon. Soon, the legendary duo of Bon Jovi and Sambora often became a trio with Shanks, or sometimes, just Bon Jovi and Shanks. For Richie, this was an existential threat. He was the lead guitarist, the co-writer, the keeper of the band's rock and roll flame. Yet here was another man stepping into his creative space. This slow marginalization created a friction that simmered for years. Reflecting on it in 2025, Sambora admitted he maybe should have left earlier, speculating that Jon's focus was shifting. I think Jon was moving into a place where he wanted to not really be a band, he said, suggesting the frontman often wanted to be a solo artist. The brotherhood was becoming a hierarchy. The partnership was turning into a dictatorship. Richie was still on stage delivering the iconic solos, but behind the scenes, he felt he was being pushed further from the creative core. The stage was set for a breaking point. April 2, 2013. Calgary, Canada. The Scotiabank Saddledome is sold out for the Because We Can World Tour. The machine is in full motion. But behind the curtain, a crisis is unfolding. The band's lead guitarist, Richie Sambora, isn't there. Hours before the show, the call came in. Richie wasn't getting on the plane. Just like that, he was gone. The official story fed to the press was swift and simple. Richie Sambora had left. Due to personal issues, Jon Bon Jovi, playing the part of the stoic leader, went on stage that night and assured the crowd the show would go on. Session guitarist Phil X, who had filled in for Sambora during a 2011 rehab stint, was flown in to take his place for the rest of the tour. Publicly, Jon's story never wavered. There was no fight, Richie just didn't show up. "I swear to Christ, there was never a fight," Jon told Classic Rock. "Nobody anticipated it. I talked to him the day before. And then the next day the phone rings. I can't go on." He repeatedly alluded to Sambora's past struggles with substance abuse, framing the departure as another chapter in that story. This narrative masterfully positioned Jon as the reliable captain keeping the ship afloat, while his first mate had abandoned his post. The implication was clear. Richie was battling his demons, and those demons had cost him his job. But for Richie, this was a convenient fiction that ignored a decade of creative turmoil. He countered with his own public reason, one that was both true and incomplete. He left for his family, specifically his daughter Ava. "I had a lot of conscious work to do around my personal life," Sambora said. "I realized Ava needed me to be around. Family had to come first." And so began the war of narratives. Jon claimed it was about irresponsibility. Richie claimed it was about family. The truth, as it so often is, was far more complex. The public saw a rock star who flaked. What they didn't see was a man who felt he'd been pushed to the edge, left with no option but to just evaporate. For the next 10 years, the story of the split existed in two parallel universes. In Jon's world, he was the long-suffering leader, forced to carry on after being abandoned by his troubled partner. In Richie's world, he was a father who made a difficult but necessary choice. Jon's spin was a masterclass in PR. He rarely spoke ill of Richie, instead expressing a kind of weary disappointment. "We're not in contact because he's not in the organization any longer," Jon stated in a 2024 interview, making the band sound more like a corporation. "Doesn't mean that there's not love forever, but it's 11 years ago that he just didn't show up anymore." By repeatedly hammering the point that there was never a fight, he shut down any deeper inquiry. Meanwhile, Richie's public statements focused almost entirely on family. It wasn't a popular decision by any means, obviously, but there was really almost no choice about it. He explained, "It was a noble, unimpeachable reason." In the 2024 Hulu docuseries, he says, "I don't regret leaving the situation, but I regret how I did it," apologizing to fans for the abruptness of his exit. But this explanation was only part of the story. It was the socially acceptable reason, the one that wouldn't ignite a public war. For a decade, Richie largely stuck to this script, allowing Jon's version, that Richie's issues were the primary cause, to become the dominant narrative. He knew the deeper, messier truth, but he kept it to himself. Fans were left to choose a side based on incomplete information. The real story, about the death of a partnership, remained hidden in the shadows. The story of Bon Jovi has touched millions of lives. The songs, the concerts, the memories, they're a part of our history. And the split between Jon and Richie is a huge part of that story. What's your favorite Bon Jovi memory? Which song means the most to you? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're fascinated by the untold stories of rock and roll, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. A decade is a long time to watch a story, to be incomplete, hardened into accepted history. But by 2025, something had shifted. With the release of a new docuseries and the perspective that comes with age, Richie Sambora, at 65, was finally ready to add the missing pages to the story. The bombshell dropped during a revealing interview on The Magnificent Others, a podcast hosted by Smashing Pumpkins frontman Billy Corgan. It was here that Richie finally detailed the creative betrayal that was the true catalyst for his departure. He explained that after his 2012 solo tour, in that one sentence, 30 years of history were erased. The legendary songwriting duo was over. Jon had made it clear, Richie's creative input was no longer required. "It shook me a little bit," Sambora admitted, a massive understatement. For what must have felt like a profound betrayal, he was no longer a partner. He was a sideman, expected to just play parts written by others. Richie agreed to listen to the new material. His reaction was one of artistic horrors. "It didn't sound like Bon Jovi," he said. "It sounded like every song that I didn't want to write." This was the final straw. It wasn't just that he was being excluded, it was that the very sound he had helped build was being changed without him. This creative expulsion explained everything. He was facing a choice: stay in the biggest rock band in the world as a glorified session player, cashing checks while his artistic integrity died, or walk away. He chose to walk. In a separate clip of unaired footage from the docu-series that he later posted, Sambora added, "I didn't receive a lot of compassion coming back for what I was going through. The family reason was real, but it was intertwined with this professional heartbreak. He had to save himself as both a father and an artist. The machine Jon was building had no room for a co-pilot, only passengers." And Richie Sambora was born to fly. In April 2024. The Hulu docu-series, Thank You, Good Night, the Bon Jovi story was released. Billed as the definitive history, for Richie Sambora, it became the final, public confirmation of what he felt was his erasure. The series, while giving him a voice, ultimately presented a narrative that aligned with Jon's version of events. Jon made a show of reconnecting with Richie for the project, inviting him to his home to watch the first 3 episodes. It was presented as a moment of reconciliation. The reality was austere. According to a representative for Sambora, Richie was appalled by what he saw on screen. He didn't like the way he was being cast. A source revealed, adding that he disagrees with how they framed his departure. To Richie, the documentary wasn't an honest history. It was Jon's history, a film that vindicated the frontman and cast Richie as the flawed figure who walked away. The docu-series glossed over the creative schism, focusing instead on his personal struggles and framing his apology for how he left as an admission of guilt for why he left. Jon even told Howard Stern that Richie came clean in the film for the fans. So I guess it would end all the speculation that there was ever a fight. Once again, the no-fight narrative was used to deflect from the core issue of creative conflict. For Richie, the message was clear. As his representative put it, to him, the currency of happiness is more important than the currency of money. The documentary highlighted the fundamental difference between the two men. Jon, the CEO, seemed concerned with legacy and control. Richie, the artist, was concerned with truth and soul. The project that was supposed to bring them together only highlighted just how far apart they truly were. In the years since Richie's departure, Bon Jovi has continued as a massively successful machine. Jon, ever the pragmatist, kept it running. The band goes on, you know? He stated in 2024, "I've made 4 albums since his departure, but fans have long asked, at what cost?" Richie Sambora's own assessment of the post-2013 band paints a picture of something that's technically functional, but emotionally bankrupt. The corporation is sound, but the magic born from the partnership of Jon and Richie is gone. This reality has been thrown into stark relief by a new challenge, Jon's voice. In 2022, the frontman underwent major surgery to repair an atrophied vocal cord that threatened his career. This health crisis has, ironically, become the central condition for any potential reunion. Richie has stated publicly he's open to returning, but only if Jon can truly sing again. "If he gets his voice back, I'll go play," Sambora promised. "The world needs it. The fans will just love it." Jon's response has been lukewarm at best. "You never say never," he said, before immediately adding, he quit the band 11+ years ago. "There's no animosity. It's a business decision, to be evaluated later." There's no enthusiastic embrace of his old partner's offer. What's left is a tragic rock and roll tale. On one side is Jon Bon Jovi, the king of his own empire, now facing a lonely battle to reclaim his legendary voice. On the other is Richie Sambora, the exiled co-creator, holding the missing piece of the puzzle, waiting for a call that may never come. The band plays on a well-oiled machine playing songs of brotherhood, but the brotherhood is broken. The empire stands, but it's an empire of one. The story of why Richie Sambora left Bon Jovi isn't about a single fight or a single moment. It's the story of a slow erosion of partnership that became a hierarchy, a brotherhood that became a business, and a sound that was sacrificed for control. For 30 years, Jon Bon Jovi and Richie Sambora were two halves of a whole. Jon was the ambition, and Richie was the soul. Together, they made magic. Apart, they're a painful reminder of what was lost. At 65, Richie Sambora has finally shared his truth, a story rooted in creative heartbreak. From his perspective, he was pushed out by a campaign of marginalization that left him with no real role in the band he helped build. He faced an impossible choice: become a ghost in his own house, or walk away and save his spirit. He chose his spirit. The tragedy of Bon Jovi isn't that the band broke up because it didn't. The tragedy is that its heart was hollowed out. It continued as a brand, but the core relationship that gave it fire was extinguished. The music lives on, a testament to what they built together. But the story is a cautionary tale of how even the strongest bonds can break when brotherhood gives way to business, and art is eclipsed by the pursuit of control. The song remains, but the harmony is gone.